Science Uncut, presented by the Volkswagen Foundation.
Hello, good morning, dear colleagues. The Ottomans welcomed the Bolshevik Revolution from the very beginning. In 5 April 1917, Grand Vizier Talat Pasha hailed the overturn of Tsarism and reminded that young Turkey was also a child of revolution, Zade-i İnkılap. Drawing parallels to their own constitutional regime and grasping the broader political meaning of the revolution, the Ottomans attempted to turn it to their own ends by distributing leaflets by aircraft and ground patrols, celebrating the felicious revolution, İhtilal-i Mes'ud. The revolution was welcomed at the Ottoman fronts too, where it created an unnamed, natural, informal armistice. In Galicia, Ottoman and Russian soldiers visited each other in the trenches, exchanged foods and goods, as we learn from Turkish memoirs. And we know that this was also a part of the German policy to demoralize Russian soldiers for war, from Leonard's book especially. Bolshevism and Bolshevik leaders gained much respect and sympathy in the Ottoman public after their declarations for peace. Soon was Lenin's government seen almost as an ally because it was against the Allies, the Entente, and denounced the war. And Lenin, moreover, published the secret agreements of the European powers with a tsardom about the partition of the Ottoman Empire. The Russian army disintegrated, its soldiers quit the front, and what was lost to Russia in war was now all taken back by peace. 1918 began with great expectations about more lands to be annexed from Caucasia, Crimea, and Turkestan. In April, for example, Batumi was taken back. This was a time when Bolshevism became an attractive alternative to many Muslims, not only to the Ottomans. One of Lenin's first decrees was directed to the toiling Muslims of Russia and the East, whose grievances the Bolsheviks sought to co-opt. A call for a holy war against Western imperialism followed, asserting the necessity to support Islamist movements with such a cause. The call was taken serious by the Unionists, the members of the Union and Progress Party, the wartime leaders of the Ottoman Empire, who left the Ottoman lands just after the armistice of Mudros in 1918 and landed in Germany the next day after the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm. They experienced Germany in the midst of the post-war revolution, the Spartacist uprising, der Januaraufstand. Muslims, not only Turkish, hundreds of Egyptian and other North African, Azeri, Indian, and Chinese Muslims lived since war times in Germany for work or study, open to the influence of leftist movements. Talat Pasha gathered many under the umbrella of the Eastern Club, Şark Kulübü, to defend the existential rights of the Muslim world. The Lebanese Druze leader and the Ottoman ex-MP Emir Shekip Aslan was the first, and the Egyptian intellectual Sheikh Abdulaziz Chawish was the second president of this club. This was not the first time that young Turk leaders organized Muslims abroad. Enver Pasha, after the outbreak of the Great War, founded the Union of Muslim Revolutionary Assemblies to organize uprisings among Muslims living under the rule of the Allies. Interesting for you, the organization included Armenian Unionists too. Talat Pasha and his friends held private discussions in Berlin with the Soviet representative Radek. The new strategy of the Unionists was to work with socialists, as the common enemy was Europe's imperialist capitalism. The plan was to use Soviet help against British imperialism via Muslim revolts in India and other colonies, and rescue Turkey from the British invaders and take the government back into their hands. The Unionist leaders corresponded with Mustafa Kemal Pasha about their intentions, and the latter will be in agreement with them. The initial policy was anti-Entente revivalism, and the Unionists were implementing pragmatically transnational policies of both Pan-Islam and communism. They founded a communist party in Baku and later another one with a totally Bolshevist and communist program. In Berlin, they set up another socialist party. Their writing expressed Turkish nationalistic and patriotic feelings put into Marxist and internationalist vocabulary. After returning to Istanbul in September 1919, members of the latter socialists set up their party and journal under the same name. Their main idea was the Turkish liberation movement should turn to socialism like all other civilized countries. And actually, it did turn the way. Following the Russian Revolution and the end of the war, political polarization transformed to a civil war in the Ottoman Empire. On 23rd April 1919, Izvestiya acclaimed the beginning of the first Soviet revolution in Asia, after running a report on local opposition movements to Allied presence in Anatolia. Just days after landing in Samsun to organize a national resistance by uniting all regional efforts, Mustafa Kemal met with a Bolshevik delegation. He reported his meeting with a telegram to his comrade Kazım Pasha Karabekir, emphasizing the possibility of a particular use of the antagonism between the Bolsheviks and the British. He further wrote that they discussed about Bolshevism and decided there is no harm in it for the country. As early as June 1919, they seriously debated about accepting and implementing Bolshevism without endangering Islamic and Turkish traditions and values. The Soviet Union was the enemy of their enemies to Kemal, and the only salvation and escape would be the uniting destinies with that force. Of course, pragmatic consequences like getting material help and securing the northern borders were crucial parts of this consideration. The alliance between Turkish nationalism and Bolshevism was quite rational. Bolshevists were a natural ally from the very first moment when Mustafa Kemal started to unite the germinating regional resistances and considered implementing Bolshevik principles for the liberation of the country. The German right-wing press faced difficulty because of the ambiguity of Kemal's program. Some German newspapers quoted his interview with the Labour Daily Herald, where he described himself as both nationalist and socialist. I quote, "The new Turkish idea wants to govern through a system that is not far from socialism. I don't want to say that we are communists. We are not, because we are nationalists. Me personally, I'm a socialist as far as this does not conflict with my nationalism." End of quote. He wrote to Telat in February 1920, "If there was no other way to save the fatherland from being torn into pieces and see the nation under British yoke, despite its difficulties, he would practically implement Bolshevik principles as much as he can." His comrade Kazım Karabekir found Mustafa Kemal too prone to the ideas of the Bolsheviks and feared that they would take over the nationalist movement. Indeed, Kemal had postponed in the summer of 1920 the retaking of Kars and Ardahan because of the Bolsheviks' pressures. The same summer, he is said to be minutely studying the communist system in Ankara, where more and more Russians were becoming visible, and where even Westernist parliament members, severely opposing the Soviet model, were at the same time very inclined towards Russia's foreign policy. Kemal, like an acrobat, managed to maintain good relations with the Bolsheviks while not allowing a Sovietization of the country. He knew that the possibility of a Soviet state in Anatolia was weak. He believed that there was never and would never be a potentiality for a Bolshevik-type revolution in Turkey. He had to demonstrate to the Bolsheviks that this belief was well-founded without damaging the close relationship and putting their material support in jeopardy. Meanwhile, the Sultan in Istanbul was propagandating that the national leaders are not a government, but a collection of rebels and revolutionaries. In policy and conviction, there are nothing else but Bolsheviks. They are only Bolsheviks. Kemal played such a subtle game that even his comrade, not just the Sultan, his comrade Karabekir was not able to understand it. More interestingly, Karabekir himself was among those important figures of the nationalist struggle, sympathizing with communism but blaming others in their retrospectively written memoirs. The amnesia, this is important, after the fascist wave and the Cold War experiences erased this era of Bolshevization, which was very obvious for that 2 years, from spring 1919 to spring 1921, when almost everyone was openly defending communism at those times in need of material support from Russia. This trend must not be considered only as a tactic or a deception, but a search also, a soul-seeking. Maybe even those who wanted to deceive the Russians found themselves caught by the attractive fury. If you think that this was a time of a, with Jörn Leonhard's words, vacuum an konkreten Identifikationsangeboten, a vacuum of concrete identity proposals, Bolshevism was an alternative. When in the Baku Congress of Peoples of the East, assembled in September 1920, Zinoviev asked a delegate what a Turkish peasant understood from the word Bolshevik, the Turkish representative answered, "We use this word generally for people who want to help us to fight against Russia." Against Britain, sorry, I'm sorry, against Britain. So a Bolshevik is one who helps against the British. You know, Anatolia was under the occupation of, Istanbul was under the occupation of Britain. The representative of the Ankara government assured in his speech that Anatolia united her destiny with the Third International. Long live revolutionist Russia and revolutionist Anatolia, who are walking this way side by side. But Bela Klun's closing remarks neither satisfied Enver, who represented the declaration as an isolated figure, and nor the Anatolian national movement, whose representative gave an enthusiastic speech. The Bolsheviks knew that the Congress of the Peoples of the East, assembled at Baku, would not enough to bring a revolution in the East, but could serve as a means of agitation and give the British leaders some sleepless nights. If there was utilization or exploitation, it was surely bidirectional. Bolsheviks also wanted to use Ottoman leaders for their cause, for their own cause. The Bolsheviks had no illusions about the Turkish nationalists. Lenin himself was in the opinion that Kemal was an opportunist, not a revolutionary, and he expected Kemal to be bought by the highest bidder. During its formation, Turkish nationalism tended to care more about state interests rather than ethnicity. This is important to understand all these happenings, to understand the Ottoman politics after the so-called constitutional revolution in 1908. Territorial and strategic considerations were more important than the nation itself. This explains why some minority members, non-Muslims, like the Jewish Tekin Alp, could join the ranks of Turkish nationalists. He was one of the intellectual leaders of the Young Turks. Turkish nationalist Ahmet Ferit thought that the future Turkish state should be built in Anatolia and the non-Muslims should stay part of it. Ziya Gökalp, considered as the father of Turkish nationalism, remained in his essence as an Ottomanist. For him, national territories are the territories of the Ottoman state. The party itself, the Unionist party itself, presented as liberal from 1908 on, nationalist between 1913 and 1918, did not hesitate to send representatives to the Socialist Congress in Stockholm in 1917. But it is hard to say who really was socialist at the times. If you take, for example, the first socialist journal in Istanbul, Gave was both unionist, monarchist, pro-caliphate, religious, and liberal socialist at the same time. İştirak, which is the most known, the official organ of the Ottoman Socialist Party, used verses from the Holy Quran. which would be unthinkable now. Mete Tunçay, the first historian to write the history of the left in Turkey, retrospectively criticized the leftism of the first socialists. They were far away from homogeneity and therefore unsettled and uninformed of socialism. Being more liberal than socialists, they were trying to find a reconciliation with Islam, according to Tunçay. Even in 1919, the most important socialist journal's first editorial wrote that the country was a socialist country from the beginning, and the Islamic law, the Sharia, was socialist friendly. As long as people obeyed Sharia, the nation lived in wealth. But afterwards, with the developing social differences, a working class emerged. Tunçay further notes that the Ottoman Armenian socialists were as much nationalists as they were leftists as well. So, nationalism and socialism were very hand in hand, very close to each other. Many socialists and communists emerged from the nationalist lines. The best example would be Mustafa Kemal, the founder of the Turkish Communist Party, who was politically active in a small nationalist party during the years of 1912 and 1913, during the years of the Balkan Wars. The intersection of socialism and nationalism offered a progressive color for the Turkish nationalism of the time. As mentioned above, Kemal was saying that he is a socialist as far as this does not conflict with his nationalism. There was also a constant struggle to translate Bolshevism into Islam, and endless debates on the suitability of one to the other. Even Kemal felt obliged to emphasize in the Congress that Bolshevism in the parliament, that Bolshevism includes the sublime principles and laws of Islam. And the victory of Bolshevism, this was during a speech at the parliament to congratulate the victory of Bolshevism against the common enemy. He further said, as we are Muslims, from the point of Islam, we have a Pan-Islamism, ümmetçilik, I mean, this is how I can only translate this, you know, the ummah concept, which moves the limited circle drawn by nationalism to an infinite field. And therefore, from this point of view, we can see a Bolshevik direction in our direction. End of quote. Bolshevism, with an Islamic color, was the main ideological configuration of that year. But this Islamic Bolshevism and Bolshevization in Anatolia will disappear in the next year, as I told you. The Ankara government feared the rapprochement between Islam and Bolshevism in Anatolia could challenge its position. The process of elimination of the Bolshevik influence began with the setup of a domestic communist party in the fall of 1920 and ended with issuing a fatwa, a religious declaration by the newly installed Ministry of Religious Affairs in the spring of 1921, disapproving communism as a dangerous and spurious movement. Religious approval and disapproval was used both at the beginning and at the end of the Bolshevization of Anatolia. Another interesting feature is that the British intelligence reports defined the nationalist movement being organized in February 1919 at the beginning as a pan-Islamic movement prepared by the CUP leaders, the Unionist party, in relation with Bolshevism and with the help of the German service. You see how supranational, how transnational the context is. A pan-Islamic movement prepared by the Unionist leaders in relation with Bolshevism and with the help of the German service, secret service. The new war configuration seemed like between the poles of Pan-Islam and Bolshevism against British and French imperialism. The socialists became more purely socialist, the nationalists purely nationalist much later, if ever. For example, Tunçay couldn't identify any slightly move between 1913 and 1918 in the socialist movements because of the authoritative measures of the Unionist government, with two exceptions. The Russian Jew Parvus, Alexander Israel Helpland, famous for his activities in the Social Democrat movement in Germany, located himself in Istanbul from 1910 to 1915, and the government sent some intellectuals to the Stockholm Conference in 1917. Actually, the Union and Progress Party was implementing statist socialist policies from the very beginning of its rule. During the Nationalist Independence War, fought against British imperialism as much as against Greek invaders in Western Anatolia, Mustafa Kemal used sometimes a very clearly anti-imperialist discourse while leaning to Soviet Russia. But Kemal secured support not only from Bolshevik Russians through his communist-flavored anti-imperialist rhetoric, but also from Indian and Central Asian Muslims with his pan-Islamic rhetoric. Considering that all leftist activities were eliminated just before the start of the negotiations of peace terms with Western powers at Lausanne in November 1922, he abandoned that discourse. Indeed, communist activities in Anatolia remained unwarranted, were banned. Later, he defined the Turkish Republic strictly in territorial terms and firmly rejected pan-Turkist assertions as well. I quote, "I'm neither a believer in a League of Nations of Islam, nor even in a League of the Turkish peoples. Neither sentiment nor illusion must influence our policy. Away with the dreams and shadows. They have cost us dear in the past." End of quote. The historiography of the Ottoman Empire tends to read the transition in the 19th century from the Tanzimat, which is 1839 until the Hamidian rule beginning in 1876. The transition from Tanzimat to Abdulhamit to the Young Turks as representing a transition respectively from Ottomanism to Islamism to Turkism. So the Tanzimat era as Ottomanism, the Hamidian era, Abdulhamit era, from 1876 to 1908 as Islamism, and the Young Turk era as Turkism. This powerful tendency to backread present-day identity politics onto 19th century's actors is obvious in this understanding of the 19th century. And it is a simple explanation with hard categories. The transition was a much more messy process of experimentation and an ongoing desperate search for a reframing of political legitimacy that would allow it to hold its disparate peoples together. This framework, Ottomanism to Islamism to Turkism, tends to reify these streams, suggesting that they represent mutually exclusive choices. Whereas the Ottoman rulers, Ottoman reformers believed that there were simultaneously existing realities, and that the state was working with multiple definitions simultaneously. The Ottomans found themselves employing a variety of identities that seemed mutually contradictory, hoping to benefit from ambiguity of identity. My aim here was to show to what extent Bolshevism, amongst other ideologies like Pan-Islamism and Pan-Turkism, became one potential source for the Turkish nation-building process. The examination of the connections between the Russian Revolution and the Anatolian Revolution, as the emergence of the Turkish nation-state is sometimes called, is exciting, yet understudied. The intriguing question of how Ottoman Turkish actors responded to and navigated within a new world changed by the Bolshevik Revolution after 1917 is important in this sense. A seemingly chaotic new world needed to be ordered with innovative configurations of current ideological trends. The transition from the late Ottoman Empire to the early Republican era is mostly interpreted as a clash of irreconcilable nationalisms as well. Actually, the final era of the empire is read as a prelude to several distinct national histories, if you think the Arab world and the Balkan worlds. The story of ethno-nationalist awakenings and the realm of competing nationalisms. This organizing theme doesn't allow to put transnational or supranational dynamics into the story, into the narrative. A sharp periodization of ideologies, and as it is now visible in the narratives on the Ottoman history, late Ottoman Empire, is not possible because all loyalties persisted together. But all because of the struggling to impose coherence upon disparate experiences and identities, historians miss to regard the significant shifts in cultural assumptions and individual identities. So we need a certain consciousness about the nature of ideologies of the time to understand how these ideologies, the socialism of that time, Islamism, Pan-Islamism of that time, or Turkism of that time, to see this nature of ideologies of the time, to get rid of our contemporary understanding of them and putting the ideas, or reflect our understandings of today to that era, and putting the ideas, we have to put the ideas into their political and social context, as using, of course, conceptual history as proposed by Koselleck would be a good remedy. To see the connections between Bolshevism, communism, nationalism, pan-Turkism, and Pan-Islamism in situ. So my question is, what comes after empire? Nation state, federation, dictatorship, communism. That was not clear, not as clear for the Ottomans of that time as we enjoy now from our comfortable retrospective positions after the triumph of the nation state and its invented historical baggage. We cannot imagine anymore that some expected communism for what remained of the shrinking Ottoman Empire. And if this was really, this expectation was reflecting a real possibility. Thank you for listening.